Hello, welcome or welcome back. And today I have one of my dear friends, Marshall from Witch of Southern Light, here with me. He has just released not his first, but his second book, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. This whole video is going to be us diving into it, so there is going to be nothing but spoilers. I've already read the book a few times, so I will be diving into a couple of things that you won't get unless you read the book. So it's crucial that you read his first book, Cunning Words, before you read Red Mother. So if you have not read either of those, don't watch this. Go back, read those two books, and then you can come back and get all of the good nitty-gritty stuff. But if you have done so, then welcome. Let's talk about the Red Mother. And Marshall, first of all, congratulations, like on publishing not your first but your second book. That's a huge deal. And I
Thank
know how
you.
long you've been working on this as well, because I have gotten the privilege to be able to read your stories as you create them. So yeah, how do you feel about publishing your second book?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Honestly, you've been so helpful helping with feedback and not just feedback, but like someone to share these things with. I'm so excited to have a video and a discussion where I get to actually discuss aspects of the book that are technically that are spoilers. Mostly because the only discussions I've been able to have been about the writing and the theoretical and the subject matter, but now I get to like dive deep in. And to be perfectly honest, I really kind of am in shock myself that I'm now a two-time published author. Um, and I'm self-published, and as of literally this week, uh, uh, I've hit over 255 copies sold, which I learned with my first book, the average number of self-published books sold in a lifetime of a single publication is 250. So to hit that mark in 3 weeks is not only wonderful for, the actual like literal business aspect of it, but just the fact that want people want to read what I have to say. People want to read my work. And I
Mhm.
love that this work now exists out in the world because it's something that literally didn't exist before I wrote it, before I put it out there, before I felt like I could channel it into this writing. So I'm really excited and I'm truly humbled when people tell me their thoughts on it, tell me their experiences on it. I've even had someone reach out and say, I've been working a couple things in your books already. So that makes me feel really appreciative and grateful.
Oh, I think this is something that I've told you multiple times, especially when you were working on your first book, was I was saying that this is a book that I think every practitioner should have. This is going to become one of the staples in every practitioner's library, and I think it should because of the way that it is. Like I haven't really seen any other book that's like this. And I mean, I've seen similar books, but nothing that's exactly like this, right? Where it
Yeah.
is a craft and a magical system being taught within poems and stories and within a specific world. Um, and I don't know, I feel like a lot of the things that are taught and the situations that come up, they're all practical, right? And they are
Hmm.
all very human instead of kind of like, oh, I don't know, just like something so, it sounds so cut and dry when you get like a spell book, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
it's just like, here's a spell for home protection. And you're kind of like, okay, but that's a very general protection, right? Like, is it protection against thieves, against, bad weather or like evil spirits, other witches? I
Hmm.
don't know. Whereas your books, you follow these characters, not only go through the motions of making these spells and these charms, but also go through the motions of actually learning how to strengthen their skills in the craft or how to even begin in the craft. So I think that's super cool. And it's also a very it's not like dense, right? Like it's not a difficult read. It's like an easy, almost like witchy bedtime story. Now some of them maybe, like wouldn't read to children, but like they are bedtime stories in my opinion. And
Yeah.
I've totally thought about like bringing these books to my niece and nephews and like maybe reading some of them to them as bedtime stories because I think they're really cool. And even some of them, which I want to get to a little later, like when we
Hmm.
get into Oliviana at the very, very end of the Red Mother, like that one I think is super cool because it's very empowering, but it's
Hmm.
also not that classic like love and light type of deal. Like it is very raw in that. So, this book focuses on the Red Mother, Belinda,
Hmm.
and we follow her from Cunning Words into this book. And I like that she comes from a place that is kind of where I think most practitioners start out is like from a place of need and want and like needing something more and in a very difficult situation. Um, I I like that she has to kind of go out and almost like not be humbled, but like beg for help in a way from
Hmm.
like with for from the spirits because that's kind of how it starts for a lot of us, right? Like we are in this really vulnerable time in our lives and that's when we're kind of crying for help from the spirits or like anything that's listening. Um have you ever actually done the spell with the river spirits? Or did you
That
with
one,
Belinda?
I will be a little bit the river from the first book, Cunning Words.
Yeah.
That one. I'll be a little bit hazy about cagey about my response with that one
Okay,
because
fair.
I definitely have done some work that involves going out, getting dirt from the river, working with spirits specifically of my land. Actually, when you were visiting, I took you to a specific stream,
Hmm.
I think, and
You
gathered
did.
quartz stones that were over there. Uh, that one, which actually connects to a sewer line that comes from a larger like river slash stream that goes through my town.
Hmm.
Um, I've definitely done some work with that, and river spirits, water spirits, it's very, very interesting. They can be all over the place. They can be raging, they can be wrathful, they can be soothing, they can be fluid. There is something about that fluidity that gives range of motion. And
Hmm.
when you brought up the vulnerable place that Belinda before she becomes the Red Mother that she was in. I do think that that's something that many of us witches, practitioners of magic, experience before we actually decide, okay, nothing else is working. I am out of options. I am at a point where
Right.
I need something much larger than me. I don't know what it is, but I am desperate and I am in need of this help. I am in need of regaining my power. And we see in the very first story that's something that she goes through.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so so that first story where she meets, the man in black and she has
Hmm.
to kind of like go back and bring these offerings and whatnot, and then she kind of does that like rite of passage where like she finally overcomes these things that she's dealing with and becomes the Red Mother.
Hmm.
I also appreciate that throughout this whole book, pretty much you see her continuously learn more things in
Yeah.
her craft, and it's not like okay, she's the Red Mother now. She like knows all these things. Like she is continuously being taught these things by all of these different spirits that she meets. Um, and personally, I think she's also being taught things by the people that she meets, like the people that she meets and like her lovers.
Hmm.
And yeah, like just because there's one where she has a lover who's like her lover is married and her husband is an asshole. And then
Yeah.
Belinda gives her a charm bag, the charm bag that she has, right?
For
And is like,
protection.
yeah, this will protect you. And like it doesn't work really. Like it like does, but like she doesn't get to like hold on to it long enough to where it
Not
like
very
actually
long.
protects her for all these things. And like I think that for some reason like that specific detail about that story sat with me for like when I first read it because I thought that I really liked how it wasn't about like okay, well now she has the charm, everything's good. Like and I feel
Hmm.
like that's a lot of the time the thought process of like okay, well like give her the charm and she's good. But life still happens, like he still took the charm from her and like that kind of like now what?
Now what?
And it's like
Well,
no, keep
there's
going.
this, no, of course, there's this moment in that story where she's confronted by her husband, the lover of Belinda.
Hmm.
Um, and he raises his hand and then something stops him.
Hmm.
And we don't really actually go into what that is. It's meant to kind of understand like the physical harm ends up somehow stopping by not necessarily controlling his mind, but more so uh, the physical harm doesn't come, but that's just it. That's when he notices the charm, and that's when he rips it from her. And so
Right.
a lot of times I think a lot of people don't always recognize that when I mean, let's be honest, a lot of us love to show our magic online. We love to show our charms. We love to show our spells. We love to show our altars. And a lot of that can totally be okay sometimes. But we don't always want to show all of our protections. If someone has the ability to snatch your protection amulet away from you, you are left more defenseless now. You are
Yes.
left without that protection. So there is a level of secrecy in hiding certain parts, gatekeeping what some of your protections are.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, totally. Well, and like I think also it tells you that I mean magic has limits, and I feel like a lot of people, especially new people coming into this, it's like, oh, like now it's magical. There is no limits. And to a point, I think I agree, but like with the spell itself, with the charm itself,
Hmm.
there's no charm that's limitless, right? Like
Right,
everything is going to have some sort of structure or limit. And yes, it stopped him from physically harming her, but the second that it's not with her, it does her no good, type of thing of like just because she knows about the spell isn't going to do anything for
right.
her. And also like if he holds on to it, does it keep him from like so like there's so many different things that it's like you don't really think about all these different factors a lot of the time until it's put into tangible like real life situations or more realistic situations such as this, which is why I think stories are such a valuable aspect of this. And speaking of her lovers, then she goes into having I don't know, Belinda just like, she gets it. She
She
gets
gets
around. I
it.
like her. Yeah.
Yes, she will
Um,
definitely have some taboo love experiences too as well. I think you're about to
She
mention that.
does. Yes, I am. And like, you know what? Good for her. Like we do not kink shame on this channel.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so I well, and this is what I'm saying is like she learns things from the people around her as
Hmm.
well because the two brothers that she loves, right? These two brothers like first of all, like there's that mention of how everybody sees these brothers as the same and they just treat
Hmm.
them the same, but she doesn't because she sees those differences. And there's so many layers within this story uh, that I really like that I think again you do so well on touching on with your stories of like it isn't just this like surface level story. It's so much more than that, and it goes into so many different faucets. It's not just like this one thing. And so
Hmm.
like they have the whole tussle and they're like she's a witch burn her or whatever and they go out and save her and burn for it, right?
Hmm.
And in that they live eternally through becoming these herbs or these spirits
Yeah, these
um,
sacred plants.
that can help her and continuously still love her, right? And
Hmm.
again, these plants like it makes me feel like it's like those herbs that people are like, oh, just substitute this for this. The same thing, like, and it's like,
Hmm.
but it's not though. Like, are they similar? Sure. Can
Sure.
they do the same thing? Sure. But like, you shouldn't treat them the same way because they're not the same thing. I'm trying to think of something like right off the top of my head, like, I don't know, like something that's like, oh, substitute rosemary for anything. It's like,
Right.
I hate that. Honestly,
I
I hate that
really
so much.
I really, really do as well. And I wrote this story. I love that you mentioned there are multiple layers there. And there's that line where she says, and I would love to say it because it's one of those that really stuck with me.
Please,
And it
yeah.
was stuck with me so much. Um, I ended up recalling it later on, uh, where she says had always been treated as a pair because they were twins,
Hmm.
They had always been treated as a pair as if they weren't each their own, but she saw them as individuals, same blood, but different bone. And that was something that really, really stood out to me, is understanding the way that a lot of the spirits we work with when it comes to for the spirits of flora, the plants, the trees, the leaves, the roots, when we work with these, yes, sometimes substitutions can be made, absolutely. But we have to actually start thinking about why we're substituting them. Is it because it's not locally available? Totally understandable. Is it because I'm too lazy to go out and get it? Mm, I understand that just a little bit less because I do think that there is work in witchcraft. There's work in making effort to do things at certain times or to brave the world to go out and get this thing, whatever it may be. And this story ends up focusing a lot on madder root and dragon's blood. And dragon's blood is really, really big in my craft. I use it in a lot of things. It ties into the redness of the red mother, and
Hmm.
it comes back and at the end of the story after they've sacrificed themselves for her to put out this fire to save her life. But this sacrifice is so significant that they grow roots, their bodies become these plants. And then she now can work with them and they follow her wherever she goes and they become her familiar spirits, the same way that we might, as witches, have a special plant that we have an affinity for, that we feel speaks to us, that we grow, that thrives in our garden, that kind of follows us wherever we go, that we see wherever we
Hmm.
go. Sometimes we see that with animals as well. Sometimes we happen to notice every single where I go, there is a white spotted owl. I swear it always knows where I am. Or
Really?
what? No, no, not me. I'm just giving an
Oh,
example.
I was like, that's so random.
That would be very random. But I
Yeah,
mean,
that would
I
be
do
really
know
random.
that notice that a lot of people have, and not people, a lot of witches, a lot of magical
Mm.
practitioners will have these experiences. And I wanted that experience to be laid out in here. I wanted this to not only show that experience, but I wanted there to be an act of transgression. Because when it
Mhm.
comes to witchcraft, I think a lot of people sometimes forget a huge aspect of it is transgression. Um, the fact that they were twin brothers and both her lovers, and I love the poem. I mean, the poem even starts out, what is it? Where the red mother was 20 and 3, she took one but not two lovers. The men both knew and didn't care. In fact, they were twin brothers. And I was kind of like, for an opening line for an epic poem, that's definitely going to hit people in a
Listen,
specific
that's a
way.
hook. Yeah,
That's,
that's a
you
hook.
know,
Like you're kind of like, do. Oh,
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 and
okay.
however you end up taking that, good. However you end
Mhm.
up taking that, good. If it made you
Mhm.
feel a specific way, whatever way it made you feel, it was
Mhm.
supposed to. And this poem and many of the other stories like it, there is an emotional connection, whether that be a love, a hate, a disgust, a curiosity, that inspires a type of feeling, a spark of emotion somewhere within you, within your psyche, within your soul, that makes you connect to it more. I'm not going to say that it's not that it doesn't matter what it is. It's more so what that feeling is. I mean, it's more so
Right.
the fact that it strikes you and sticks
Yes.
with you and
Hmm.
changes something within you. It connects you to this story. It connects you to these spirits. Um,
Hmm.
that's something that I think creates the spark of magic. If you brought up before, yes, you can open up a book and you can find a home protection spell, super easy. But if you were to read a story about the adaptability, the adaptation of a home protection spell, a person protection spell, and then you also see, oh wow, so someone rips that protection spell off of me now, it's protecting them. Maybe it also teaches you, hey, maybe I need to do something that's really specific to me. Maybe I need to add my name to it. Maybe I need to hide that amulet. And it's an adaptation of a larger spell that's actually about conjuring a protective spirit, which we
Right.
see later on in the book, of course, which actually means it cannot be ripped from you. It's attached to you. And we
Hmm.
see those different variants. I remember you mentioned something before how if you were to read a protection spell, like, yeah, that's great. This is good. I can do that. It's like a recipe in a book. But the same way that I read all of the practical magic books, and they talk about constantly through all four of these novels, the chocolate tipsy cake. the description of baking the chocolate tipsy cake, the moments of them enjoying for birthdays or celebration the chocolate tipsy cake. I want to make that chocolate tipsy cake. I really want to have this cake that was described in Practical Magic, the book series. But if I were to open up any random recipe book and see, like chocolate tipsy cake, it's not going to have that same emotional pull for me. It's not going to mean as much for me. It could be the exact same recipe, but it's not going to build that fire in my chest and my soul that makes me
Yes.
connect back to the spark of magic I felt while reading it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like, I think I've mentioned this before, but one of my teachers taught me that it's like a spell is not, it's not a like a baking recipe where you have to have it,
Hmm.
every single thing. It's more like cooking. And so, if I'm like, oh, you can make this sandwich, right? And put all these things in it, but if you don't have ham and you put salami in it, it's still a sandwich. It's still going to be fine. But is it
Yeah.
going to be a ham sandwich? No. Like
Hmm.
so like yes, you can have these what are they called? Oh my God.
Substitutions.
You can have these substitutions. Thank you. Brain just turned off. And but it doesn't mean it's not going to be the same thing. Like I kind of get frustrated when you see all these things where it's like, oh, like make this spell, and then if you don't have that, just use rosemary, it'll be the same thing. It's not though.
Hmm.
It's just not going to. Like rosemary has different energy than whatever
Hmm.
you like a rose thorn, right? Like you can't just switch those things out. I mean, like you can, but they're not going to be the same thing. It'll
Yeah.
still do its job, but it's not going to do it in the way that you probably expect it to
Hmm.
by using like you can't charge rosemary in the same way you're going to charge a rose thorn. That's like
Totally.
that's just not how that's going to work. And I think that specific story about the twin brothers is like what I get from it personally because
Hmm.
it's the same. Like I feel like people do that with herbs or do that with substitutions of like, oh, just switch them out. It's the same thing, but like no, they're different people. They're different lives, they're different
Hmm.
energies. So I think that's like one of my more favorite stories. I think I actually like this book a little more than Cutting Words because it's so much darker than your first one. There's so many like I don't know, I feel like that first one was like I mean, that first one was good. The second
Hmm.
one, it's like I think you just were like I am taking all the risks and putting all the things in here. Like you have all of these really, I think, generally shocking aspects to it. I think it's also, again, pretty dark. There's a lot of situations that our characters get into that you're like, oh God, or that
Hmm.
things happen and they don't end happy. And I think because of the way that you write and it is very fairy tale-y like, you almost expect it to, but like they
Yeah.
don't. And I like that also because it's not always happy, right? Like it's just not how it works. And then same thing of like, oh, you're trying to use magic, but if you don't know how it works, then it's not going to go the way you want it to. And then now we have this thing of like, oh, our spells are backfiring, but in reality, they're not. Um, I think it's the story with the three sisters, right? Where they
Oh
have
yeah.
they're wishing on the bay leaf, right? And they
Hmm.
they're making all these wishes and their wishes just are not coming out like they think they were going to, but they're getting exactly what they asked for, but it's because they
Hmm.
weren't specific enough or because they didn't, think about something in the long run or like they didn't factor in all the factors. And I personally don't believe that spells backfire. I think that
Hmm.
it's working the way that you put it out. And there's a lot of different factors of why it didn't work out the way you wanted it to. But I don't think that spells ever backfire. I think it's just a reaction that you have sent out.
Absolutely. What You Wish For, that's the name of that one. That one,
Oh, that makes sense.
honestly, yeah, what You Wish For is what it's called. And I'll be honest, that one is the best campfire story. It is like
It's
one of
so good.
those,
It's
it's
so
it's the
good.
it's the best campfire story in the whole book, I think. Um, and it is about three sisters. Some of them are not very nice, who trek out into the woods because they hear the story of a witch who lives in there who, if you catch her, she'll grant you wishes. And it is the Red Mother, it is Belinda but the thing is this is where you actually start to see her foray into not necessarily being baneful or menaceful or villainous. That's not what she's doing. She's just being the witch. And she warns them, be careful what you wish for. You may get exactly what you ask. And the whole point of the story is that we as spell crafters really need to start thinking a lot about what we ask for in our spells, what our not only our desire and intention is, but be careful about the words that we use. I do think
Yes.
that a lot of people sometimes listen, we as and I should say this as English speakers. I mean, every language has their euphemisms, of course, but I'm only speaking as an English speaker. We have our euphemisms, so I mean, like I remember people talking about like blue wave during the last election. And I'm like, if you were to do a spell for a blue wave, I mean, what's to stop you from getting a tsunami? Like, I do think that euphemisms, and I'm just using this as a metaphor, but there are a lot of times that we sometimes use very simple and generalized verbiage without really understanding or taking the time to think about the enormity of what that could also actually
Hmm.
mean. Like the first one asks for abundance, and she
Hmm.
ends up getting pregnant with twins and dies. Like, or
Which
sorry,
like
triplet.
yeah, like which when I will tell you when I read that, Marshall, like being pregnant is probably the top fear of mine. I That scares the shit out of me, which is why I don't have tubes anymore because like
Right.
absolutely not. So like when I was reading the story, when you were like, "Oh, it's a good campfire story," I was like, "Yeah, it's a really good like horror campfire story." This woman gets pregnant with not only a child but three of them and then dies because of it. Like
Hmm.
no, it's like that's like ingrained in my brain for the rest of my life. Thank you for that. Um, but I
Welcome.
just like I and also thank you. But also it was like the speed of which she became pregnant, right? Like it wasn't that it's
On the
over
way
this like
home.
9 months. Yeah, like she literally like just the idea of like that form changing so quickly. I was like, "Ugh," like
Hmm.
everything about it. But yeah, and I think it's also another thing that kind of haunts me is like the way it loops. I feel like this story is so haunting to me because like it's like they're just trapped in this endless loop because they'll never learn, which kind of maybe might talk to, I don't know if this was intentional on your part of like generational trauma. Um,
Family trauma was a really big one with
okay.
this one
Yeah,
because, their parents died. The first thing one of the sisters
right.
says is, "Good, maybe you can wish us out of this hovel our parents left us." Like
Hmm.
there's no gratefulness.
Hmm.
There's no gratitude. There is obviously generational trauma. There's obviously animosity between the three sisters. And
Hmm.
in the very, very end, even the one who actually wishes to save them still doesn't get it
Well,
right, and she's
yeah,
still doomed to be part of this cycle. And the thing is when you finish it, you're kind of like, wait, how many times have they been through this? Am I coming in on the first cycle, or is this the
the
100th?
100th. Yeah,
You don't
you don't
know.
know. Yeah, and I mean like that's kind of yeah, like that's a I think that's such a good story about like generational trauma of like if one of them could get it right, it would break
Hmm.
the whole entire cycle. But
Yeah.
instead, they're just stuck in this constant loop and like, oh my God, I hate that too. So honestly, that's like one of not that I hate your story, but like
No,
honestly, that's
no.
one of the
It's obviously making you feel some very strong things. It's
it
big
is.
feelings,
Yeah.
and big feelings
Yes,
are
very
what
big feelings.
I think that's really a major impetus progenitor of magic.
Yeah, it is. Um, Yeah, and so like I think that's definitely one of the stories. I'm not gonna call it my favorite, but one of them that has definitely stuck with me after you sent it to me. And I was like, "Ooh." Like, yeah. Um,
Good.
mhm. Good. I want to talk, I want to kind of like get a little deeper into towards the end.
Let's do
So
it.
we get into more of like the darker, even darker, more darker aspects of these stories and these characters. And that's when we kind of meet Oliviana, right?
Yeah.
And so is she the next book that you're planning? Can I ask that?
You can ask it, but I'm not going to
I'm not
answer
gonna
it.
answer. Okay, okay. Well, the reason I ask is
Hmm.
because first of all, I mean like, she pops up, but also I noticed that in your illustrations that there's
Hmm.
the Red Mother and she's popping up, and there's the spirits, like kind of, there's like a bunch of them. I don't know what you call it, but it's like the same print over and over, and only one of them is colored red. And then once we meet Oliviana, there's one that's black on the other side. And I didn't know if it was like we're just like adding, and like she's the next step or something. I don't know. Maybe that was it, but you're
Well,
not gonna answer, so.
I will say that the only color, if you do get the color copy, the hardcover is the color copy.
Hmm.
The only color throughout is red, and it's different shades of red. So
Okay.
that wasn't necessarily a suggestion of what's to come next, but
Okay.
it was really, really important. And I know I've said this in an interview before that this isn't just a prequel to Cunning Words, it's kind of an
Hmm.
alongside. So we met Oliviana in the first book, and in Cunning
Hmm.
Words, she's the one who becomes our Mother in Black,
Hmm.
and she's inspired by Old Mother Blackcap from the grimoire, the Black Toad. But I knew there was more to the story of the Red Mother, there is more to the story of Liviana. There's more to the story of the Black Mother, and we got a little bit of her backstory in the first
Hmm.
book. We got that she was an assassin. We got that she was abused when she was young. We
Right.
got that she got to the point where she ended up killing the evil queen in the Cunning Words, right? So we knew all
Hmm.
this stuff before she was murdered and rose back from the dead, becoming our Mother in Black, becoming
Right.
this liminal, death-defying and embodying spirit. But what led her there? What got her to the point where she became this assassin? What what was the impetus to her becoming this being, this witch, if you will? And
Hmm.
what's really interesting is because this is an long cycle, there are a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of what a character that was introduced in the first book was the sorry, not the character, the characters were the three wise healers, right? We
Hmm.
got to know where they came from, and there was a small side character, the midwife, who ended up going taking this kind queen's place, with some transformation magic, and she was burned at the stake. We know that was given to us in Cunning Words, but who was she? Where did she come from? And we can't quite talk about Oliviana without talking about the midwife, because
Hmm.
this midwife had a chance meeting with the Red Mother, and the Red Mother had this spirit encounter where she was given a directive to leave behind a bit of transformation magic. For what, she didn't know. And for what, the midwife was given it, and she didn't know what it was for until
Hmm.
later. And we get to this point where we see this midwife end up helping the kind queen who gives birth to the three wise healers, which is the whole, like I said, the whole story in Cunning Words.
Right.
But then what happens to her? We see the other side. We see her perspective as she is being burned at the stake. We see her in her last thoughts were seeing the robin as the Red Mother singing to her, and she felt no pain, and then she died. But
Hmm.
that's, of course, where the next story begins, which is the conjuration of Ira. And
Hmm.
this is where we start to see the spirit of Ira, the spirit of wrath, the spirit of anger, the spirit of revenge and vengeance come to life. And of course, when the Red Mother conjures the spirit and sends it off to be the undoing of this evil queen who was burning all these people, we didn't quite know exactly how it happened. Well, the story gives us that journey. It gives us the journey of how Ira came and met this child. Of course, you're reading this and you're like, wait a second, she just conjured the spirit to bring the undoing of the evil queen. Why is it coming to this small child, Oliviana? And
Hmm.
that's because it needs to also show the way we as witches sometimes cast spells that take these windy roads to get to their end path.
Yeah.
We know what the end goal is, but a lot of times, magic is like water. It goes down a river, it goes down a stream. There's rocks and twists and turns and bends.
Mhm.
There's rapids, and then there's really still, smooth water. So this spirit finds Oliviana when she's young, when she's also vulnerable, and they go through an experience together where they become one.
Mhm.
And we start seeing this other side of her experience. She's not just an assassin, she's a powerful witch. It comes from this spirit. And the way in which Our Mother in Black opens with her, really, really happy that she just killed this queen. She assassinated her. She's going to go home, and then she gets killed and comes back to life through the poisonous garden, right?
Mhm.
Why? Why does this poisonous garden have an affinity for her? It's because of the spirit relationship she already had. We now get to see the other thought process of it. We see her as she is laying there dying and the thoughts she's having versus just the outside viewership. We get to hear her inside thoughts now as she's laying there pleading, and she goes, Ira, are you there? Like she's searching for the spirit as it's leaving her. And just as she has her last breath, this plants come alive, and the spirit says, "We are here." And of course, that's where you know what happens when she becomes
Mhm.
our mother in black.
I love that there's always like a this rebirth. And I think that that's kind of, I think you and I have talked about this maybe on your podcast,
It's
maybe, but
possible.
I know we've had this conversation before where
Yeah.
um we have talked about almost every witch needs that like rite of passage. Like you can be practicing prior, but like
Sure.
there's this point. I think it was on your podcast. Um and maybe I wasn't even on it. I don't even, it doesn't matter. But like I know that Austin said something where he was like, what did they say? They were like, every witch always gets hotter after their initiation. I don't make the rules. And I was like, you know what? That's true though. But it's because there's
Hmm.
like all of a sudden there's like this glow, there's this confidence, there's this aura, this energy change, this power that comes from a practitioner who, like, they're practicing whatever. And then somewhere along the way, whether no matter where it is in their life, they get initiated. Like there's this turning point. And I feel like
Hmm.
that's an example. Like obviously we don't have to actually physically die, but it's like there is this
Right.
weird death energy of like
Yeah.
you get rid of everything you thought you knew and everything that you used to be, and then kind of just have to create yourself from the ashes. And you just come back with so much more power. And that is like their initiation essentially from being Oliviana to our mother in black,
Hmm.
and same thing with Belinda. Like there's these points where it's like they're practicing, but then there's this shifting point where it's like, okay, now you earned the cloak, right? Like
Hmm.
that type of thing. Um, so yeah, I think, wow, those are sharp claws, sir. Oh. Um, so I think that's a really cool aspect of it, of just kind of like this death and rebirth to it, of like becoming this powerful practitioner. I also want to talk about and ask you a little bit about the because so the Red Mother, she is a charmer, right? That's her whole thing.
Hmm.
And she has these beautiful inscriptions. Like there's like this
Yeah.
whole alphabet that you have created. And I love this alphabet. Like, let me tell you that if I am ever wanting to like do some kind of charm or like anything like that that's like a written charm, I always have been referring to your alphabet because I just love the way that it looks. Yeah, like I'm just like taking it, and I like kind of just bring in that red mother energy because I really love this alphabet that you've come with. Like I just think it's beautiful. Yes.
I'm going to show it so people can see a picture
Yeah,
of
do
it.
it.
So there's this wheel of lettering, and they are inscript. I call them red inscriptions. It's interesting because the application came first to me, and I remember sending it to you. And then there was something that just told me in there, like, this is not ever all there is. There's a lot more to this. And then slowly this story came to me. I call it an epic poem. It's about the origin of the Red Inscriptions. It's called Red Inscriptions, the Tale. And there was something about these letters that seemed so otherworldly to me, so much more magical. Like, listen, I love a good Theban. I love a good rune. But there was also something that was connecting me to getting in touch, honestly, with kind of the mighty dead, not kind of, the mighty dead themselves. There is an aspect, and I've talked about this before. I live in a neighborhood. I live in a very queer space. I live in a space that I know has been this way for many, many years. I live in a space where I know people have, I mean, let's just be really real here. Like the AIDS crisis where I live was super major. I live in a building where people have died in our of our queer ancestors. And get this feeling constantly that they are still here. I get this feeling constantly that they are still living through us, that they are hungry for that life they never got to live. Um, it was a very devastating time. I met a neighbor downstairs. Uh, his name was Michael. And I remember he was an older gentleman and he was very, very sweet before he moved away. And he invited me and my friends in one time because he was like, you want to see my, because, I was like, would love to see your place. And he invited us in and he showed us this wall of pictures and all of these like beautiful men from like the 70s and the 80s. And I remember he started putting, he was like, that's Steven. He lived over at this one over here. That's so and so. He lived over at this one over here. Now he passed away in 81. And then we lost Steven over in about 85. And then we lost so and so over here about 1991. And then
Oh,
it just kept going on until I understood he didn't say it, but I understood he was the only one left. And
oh my God.
he too was hospitalized when the AIDS crisis was going on. And unfortunately, and it was fortunately for him, he survived it, but he was the only one out of his entire group of friends to survive. And all of a sudden, I started realizing what grounds I was really living on. The lives
Yeah.
that never got to meet their full potential, their full ends. And it really started coming within me this hunger of these spirits who still exist here, who still have more unfinished life. And, I do think that parallels very deeply with our witch ancestors. I think that parallels very deeply with women and men who were accused, who were never witches, who were outcasts,
Mhm.
who were older, who had knowledge, who had a spine and spoke up against, the patriarchy. Like there are so many hungry, unfinished spirits. And I dedicated this story to them. I dedicated the Red Inscriptions to them. They became the pen strokes. They funneled up from this earth that I live on and became this inspired alphabet. And I wanted to give them back some agency. I wanted to dedicate this to their power, to their life, to their future. I wanted to call up the spirits who wanted to participate. That being the key word, who wants it to be part of it.
Mhm.
You want to be part of the spellcraft. If I was going to do a spell for something, I wanted those spirits who want to be involved in this. I wanted to call them up and I wanted to invite them to empower it. I wanted to give them life again. This,
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that's something again, like I just feel like in your work you cover a lot of things that are often overlooked in the craft.
yeah,
But things that are so incredibly important. So that even like just like you were saying of you have all of these queer ancestors, and I feel like we're so focused on like our blood ancestors of like our grandpa, our grandma, like whatever,
hmm
like the our heritage, whatever. But it's like okay, but like there's this idea of we're like a mosaic of who we've met and people, and it's like but those people are our ancestors too. Like
hmm
I feel like limiting ourselves to our blood is such a there's I have a lot of opinions on that. But like our queer ancestors, right? Like they are people who also paved the path for us to be where we are now. Um
absolutely.
and so it's like I get to be openly queer and not have to really worry nearly as much as my previous queer ancestors, you know? And it's like I get to experience life with my friends who are happily open and are happily transitioned and like, things like that. And I get to honor the queer ancestors who paved that way so that we could be living the life that they should have been living. And that I think is so overlooked, is so beautiful. There's so many other spirits and people that deserve to be on ancestor altars that
hmm
probably are not. So like I think that's fantastic. And I had no idea that that is where that specific alphabet came from. I think that's like that just makes everything even better. And maybe that's why I like love it so much because it speaks to me a lot. I've used it in so like in like protection spells specifically. Um but also, yeah, like it feels personal. Like
Yeah, it's very
like and
personal.
yeah, and I think that's why, because again, like you said, like I love a good rune, I love a good like I love all the other alphabets, but they're just so they don't like really strike me, and I feel like your alphabet really did. So I've been using it in a lot of different things, and I've
Oh,
kind
that's
of
so
been testing
wonderful.
it. Yeah, I've been testing it in different ways because I think I mentioned to you like a year ago that I was like I'm gonna try it on a candle and see how that goes, even though it's like technically supposed to be like written and stuff. I've
Yeah,
only done it once. It was okay, but we'll see. Maybe we'll test it more. But yeah, like I've really enjoyed it. So just so you know, it's been put to use. I use it a lot.
I
And
love
so I
that.
appreciate that. And knowing the backstory of it, I think makes so much sense of why it just connects with me so much more. I think I really, really love that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that also and like putting that out publicly. I think that's a really vulnerable thing to create and send out.
Well, there was an aspect of this story, and I have this picture here. I'll show it so the audience members can see it. There's this picture of her going up on the hillside, which is part of the story, and inviting these spirits to become these strokes, these pen strokes in her book.
Hmm.
And there was a little bit of history, just because I want to include our queer ancestors, obviously, in this conversation again. There is an aspect of our queer ancestors, our queer ancestors who lost their lives, especially in the AIDS crisis, that you know of because we've discussed it, but a lot of people don't know of, is during the 80s when this was going on, a lot of family members really abandoned us. The medical community really abandoned us. And the people who stepped in were the lesbians. Lesbians stepped in, which is why we actually honor lesbians in the LGBTQIA community by putting the L first. It wasn't always that way. Before the AIDS crisis, it was actually a G first in this acronym, but they put the L first specifically to honor the lesbians who stood up, who came forward and stood with us as gay men as we were dying. They came to the hospitals, they held our hands, they marched, they not only joined ACT UP, they founded whole foundations and organizations that were meant to raise funds, raise awareness for us as we were dying. And they stepped up in a way to bring this information to the public, to hold our hands, to be there for us when nobody else was. And being that Belinda, the Red Mother, is in my opinion, queer icon, I
Yeah,
wanted this story
absolutely.
to be about her bringing back that agency to these ancestors. And
Mm.
so that's some of that parallel there. And now people know a little bit more about the history of the L and the LGBTQIA plus.
Yeah, yeah. I think again, and that's another thing. I mean, we're coming up on time, but I because I could sit here and talk about it
I know,
well
right, right, right.
forever. But I think that's another thing is that I appreciate about your work again is like there's not really things like this. Like, yes, there are queer witchcraft books, but
Sure.
there's not. I don't think I've ever read queer folklore. That's, like that's something that really just makes me happy to see queer folklore as because like
Yeah.
it just as if like queerness had not existed prior, which like we all know is not true, but
Hmm.
like especially the way this is written, I it feels like, Grimm's fairy tales, which there might be a little ring to that in the book as well, but like
Hmm.
um there's it feels very Grimm's fairy tales and like they feel like they fit like back then. There's not really like a time frame, right? I don't think, but like it feels like it's just back then. It feels very like old the way that these stories are written. And so like it feels like we've just been plugged in of like where we should have been to begin with, but like those stories were just erased or like maybe the genders were changed to make it heteronormative. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like to have it written in a book of just like queer folklore that also it's not I at least the way that I read it, the queerness is not really um other than one story, but like when Belinda has her one lover, right? Like or her woman lover in the
Hmm.
first one and then with her two brothers, like nobody there's not really anything that's like why is she going back and forth or why is she seeing a woman or whatever. Like there's not really like this weird taboo around who she's loving. It's just more of like the fact that it was adultery, or like, the fact that like it was more around like that aspect and less about demonizing the queerness. And I also liked that piece too, because I feel like a lot of the time when queerness is mentioned, we have to talk about that struggle instead of like
Yeah.
the other struggles that are part of it. And like the queerness is that central part, when like it doesn't always have to be, like it could just be a part of the story, whereas like the actual struggle is this. And that's
Yeah.
another thing that's like super refreshing for me, to read a book that's like the queerness is not the struggle for once.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
that's so nice.
there's a huge aspect of queer joy in my writing and that I really wanted to push forward in the first book, Cunning
Mhm.
Words. I actually specifically wrote about stories because I didn't grow up reading folklore and fairy tales that I could see
Mhm.
myself in. I always had to adapt it. I always had to imagine I was the princess. I mean, you know, I never got to see my own experience in stories until I was older and I started reading a lot more like gay fiction, but I had to seek it out. It wasn't readily
Right.
available to me. And in this, of course, there's a whole coming out story called The Witch's Cord, which teaches
Mhm.
how to use a spell inspired by the original nine knot witches spell through history. But it takes another step forward and applies a very specific adapted magic to the nine knot spell and a cord and teaches the witch how to make their own cord. But there is a story about Myrick, that's his name, which is very specific because that's actually my dad's middle name. And that's another
Oh, I didn't know
backstory.
that
I,
actually.
yeah, that's another backstory, but I did specifically choose that name because um, there's a touch of relationship with my own dad. I love him, but that's like I said, a different conversation. But this coming out story was so important to me because the witch gives him an opportunity to decide what his fate's going to be because he wants to come out to his parents. And he could choose anything. He could make this spell, make them accept him. He could make this spell, make it to where he disappears and they don't have to know he exists. I mean, like this is a fantastical story, of course. But ultimately, what he chooses is to have courage. And that's actually one of the biggest things that many of us queer people cannot escape is eventually at some point in our lives coming out. And truly, the one thing I think each and every one of us have when we do come out is the courage to do so. And many of us have different types of coming out stories with beautiful or really tragic circumstances or outcomes. But no matter what we go through when we do it, the courage to do it is absolutely astounding. And there are a lot of people who will never know what it feels like to have that kind of courage. And I wanted this story to touch on that, to really, really delve into what it means to say those words aloud, knowing I can never take them back, and understanding
Yeah.
that the bravery it takes to say those words aloud, the fear we have in our souls that make us understand there's no turning back. Like it is a
Mhm.
major step that we cannot undo. It's a bell you can't unring. And I really wanted the theme of that story to really touch upon the bravery it takes to do it.
Yeah, I mean, like it, it's the death card, right? Like it's this massive change, and you have no
Back
idea
to
what's
rebirth
next.
again, you know? It's another
It's the
rebirth.
rebirth. Yeah, that's a huge rebirth. I just really appreciate like everything. I also like learned little Easter eggs that I didn't even know about, and I feel like I had the exclusive look. Okay, so we're coming up on time,
Of
but
course.
I want to just thank you for you coming on and chatting with me about it, and like, letting us have like a spoiler full of spoilers episode. And if you all want to get more information, I know that Marshall did a podcast episode on his book as well. So I'll link that down below, but I'll link everything else down below. Both of his books, his Linktree, everything else, Patreon, all that jazz. But Marshall, do you have any closing words or anything that you want to like, any place that you want to send anybody, anything like that?
I want to thank you so much for having me on. I have been itching to have a spoiler interview so we can talk about it. This has been my baby for the past year and a half, and putting
Mhm.
out into the world again has been really scary for me. But at the same time, I'm so glad it is now in the world. I'm so glad people are going to get to have the opportunity to see themselves in stories after going sometimes their whole lives without having that opportunity. I Craft is really fucking cool. Can I say that?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I think, and I don't mean that just because I wrote it. I mean that because it is very new, but it's inspired by something ancient. It's different, but it's going to feel like home. The way that stories touch us and our souls are the way that I think magic should feel. And I want readers to feel that kind of magic. I want more magic like this out in the world. So please, if you want to buy my book, Cutting Words and The Red Mother, all of them are available on Amazon. Um, it soon will be available on Ingram Spark if you're in a cult shop and you want to carry it. I am definitely open to more interviews. If you're a podcaster and you want to talk about it, please reach out to me, DM me on my Instagram, or email me, which is listed on my Instagram as well. I'm truly flabbergasted that I have now put two books into the world, but I'm also very proud of them. And I think that this is magic that is going to have, in my opinion, a long-lasting impact on the craft and the occult world.
Agreed. Yeah, I like that is such a huge accomplishment. So again, congratulations. And here's to
You.
5, 10 more books, however many more that you can pump out and that you were excited because I know again, I'm just gonna flex here, but I know there are other things in the works,
Oh
and I'm
yeah.
really excited to see those things also come to light because again, your work is just something that I think the witchcraft community has needed for so long, but the format that you're putting it out, the way that you're putting it out with the passion that you're putting it out, I think is just so fucking important. And I'm really excited to see the shift. I really do think that these are going to be foundationals. I think that they should be foundationals in folk practice. Like if you're a folk practitioner, this should just be in your library. There's not really a reason it shouldn't be. But yeah, so thank you again. If you want to find Marshall, like I said, everything is down linked down below. And make sure to give him a follow and keep up with all of his amazing work. So thanks, Marshall. I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.